Welcome back to another episode of the Security Champions podcast. I'm your host, Michael Birch, the Director of Application Security here at Security Journey, and I am joined today with Dustin Lehr. Now, before becoming a security leader, he spent 13 years as a software engineer and application architect in a variety of different industries, including retail, DoD, even video games. His background helped him forge close partnerships with development teams, engineer leaders, and software security advocates, design security programs that maximize engagement. Currently, he's the Senior Director for Platform Security at Fivetran Plus and co-founder and chief solution officer at Katilyst Security, which helps companies build security culture and security champion programs. He's also the co-host of an open discussion remote meetup, Let's Talk Software Security, and he authored the Security Champions Program Success Guide. Now, I can't do it justice with my little memorized red blurb. I think, Dustin, best would be you tell us your security journey and what's led you to where you are today.
Absolutely. First of all, happy to be here, Mike. This is going to be a lot of fun today to chat with you. So my journey, just like you mentioned, really started as a software engineer, which I was for 13 years, and wrote a lot of code, interfaced with a lot of security folks, I would say over the years, even in the DoD, especially probably in the DoD. There's challenges, there's challenges being on the developer side and interfacing with security folks that I kind of noticed all along the way. And I've always had like a focus on quality in general. Like how do I, it's not just write the code and make the feature work. It's always been, how do we do this more efficiently? And are we writing code that's maintainable and performant and secure and that sort of stuff? So I was always like naturally drawn to that side of it, right? So I had an opportunity at Staples to go from, I was an application architect at the time, and I moved into a security architect position at Staples, which I was in that position for 3 whole months, and then they actually invited me to lead the AppSec team. So developer to application architect to security person for 3 months, and now I'm leading an AppSec team. Like, wow. I had to think about it too, because I'm like, hey, I enjoyed the technical side, like leadership always looked fun, but I wasn't quite sure it was the right move. But I made the transition and I never looked back. I've loved every minute of being an AppSec leader ever since. And that's about 5 years ago now. Most recently, I moved to Fivetran about 2 years ago and helped to start their AppSec program essentially from scratch. And then kind of inherited cloud security as well to make it a platform security role. And then, like you mentioned on the side, I do consulting around security champion programs. I love that space. That's why I'm happy to be here today and talk more about security champions. So I've helped several clients, at this point set up their own champion programs. And then I do a couple things, like you said. I've got a meetup. We meet every month. We have an open discussion about software security. That's been a lot of fun. And then I did also release a guide to help folks learn more about how to build champion programs. That's that Security Champion Success Guide. So that's a little bit about me. I'm sure we can get into more detail here as we go, but that's a good start.
So one question I do have is, what really drew you to the security champion side of stuff, right? Like the security is a big realm, right? So there's not a bunch of us that dive in and be like, security champion's the way to go. So what kind of drew you into that space?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I was facing at Staples when I inherited the AppSec team was scaling the program, right? Like we had a small team. We were focused on doing specific things, scanning. It was DAST mostly at the time. And we're like, okay, how do we get the word out? Like, how do we actually reach the engineers across the organization and convince them that this is a good idea to take security into account? It's all about security by design. It's all about building security into the process, which we can't do alone. We're this limited sized team. How are we going to go out and do all this stuff for them? We're not going to do it for them. What we need to do is we need to train them, the engineers, and help them understand the importance of all this stuff so that we're all in control of basically our own security, right, at the end of the day. Now, I found, and in talking to my team, there were ideas thrown out there. People had heard of champion programs. They're like, how about we utilize a champion program to basically start with our allies, like find people in the company that already sort of care about security. They've heard about it. Maybe they're quality driven, kind of like I was in my career. They know about the importance of it, and we start to enlist them to help, right? And that's the beginning. And there's always like this snowball effect that happens. Like you find your initial allies, you start working with them, they know other people, and it kind of starts to grow organically. And that's exactly what happened at Staples until we had like a more mature program, where we had official like brown bag meetings every month. And I think we grew it to like 170 something champions. We only had 140 engineering teams. So it caught on, it worked, and it was just amazing. So, yeah.
That's a great story. So I love the fact that one of the most powerful tools I think that is underutilized in our space is the social skills, is the ability to start reaching out to and building relationships with engineering teams and other people that we're working with to help find those people. Because if we just sit in our own silos, how often is it that we never find those people, right? Never find those people that would love to be with us and doing the same thing, but we lack that barrier because we're not reaching out and trying to get into our community.
Yeah, I would say, I heard this once at a conference. When you become a security person, you become a salesperson, right? Because you got to get out there, you got to sell the idea of security to leadership, to engineers. You got to learn how to talk. You got to learn how to, inspire people and find advocates, essentially. And I really took that to heart. It was actually pretty early when I got into security that I heard that quote, and I'm like, okay, let's do this. Game on. Like, I was heads down technical developer for 13 years. It's time to tap into the other side of it, and turn into an extrovert somehow if I can do that, and that's been really helpful. And I'm always encouraging other folks, like folks on my teams, to get out there more, communicate more. The more you can inspire other people, the easier time you're going to have in terms of shifting the culture toward security.
So I just felt across the entire world where all these the engineers' ears started burning when you called them a sales guy. And they're like, hey, wait a minute, I'm not a sales guy. But it's so true. It's the fact is I feel that like half our job is convincing people that what we're doing is important. And it's getting that buy-in that like, no, really, we need to do this.
Yeah, I don't want to break their hearts. Like the technical side is still very important, of course, but there's this balance, and that's why people talk about hiring purple unicorns in AppSec all the time, right? You got to find someone that can do the technical side, but can also talk about what they're doing and communicate effectively. And that's so true. It's hard to find great AppSec people, but you could always specialize too. We should maybe talk about this a little bit because, I think there are places for positions on your team for different skill sets. And that's where I really want to see the industry start to go is like, maybe your team isn't comprised of just highly experienced AppSec architects. Maybe you've got a few of those, but then you have engineers that can write code, plus maybe someone with more of a marketing or sales background who's going to help you with the communication and the messaging and that kind of stuff. Like, I think we need to think about how we structure our teams a little bit different to really reach people.
Yeah, I really agree with that. It's actually a very powerful statement. It's funny as though I actually gave a talk this year. One of the things I talked about, one of the parts I try to drive home at the end of it is developers are the largest part of our security team, right? If you treat them any differently, you're missing the point because, to be honest, I'm not writing the security controls. I'm not setting up the pipeline. I'm not doing all the tasks that are going to create security in our organization. I'm supporting, I'm scanning, I'm remediating, I'm helping, but I'm not doing the work. The work's being done by the largest part of our security team, the entire development team, the architects, the ones actually building this. And my hope is over time that we shift that mentality to it's no longer like two different teams. The fact is it's all one big team. We're all doing one same thing. And it's funny because a lot of people talk about it where we have two different lines of effort. Like, security's effort's this, development's effort's this. I'm like, actually, no, we all have the same exact effort. We just have to stop being so hyper-focused on one piece of it that we understand that we need to be providing the other part of it too, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and that's actually a good way to talk about security champions as well. And kind of the whole point of having a program like that is really to reinforce and encourage people to take action when it comes to security. Because like you're saying, security team isn't typically fixing the actual vulnerabilities or patching the systems and so on. What we do is measure, report, find issues, and then work with the engineers on solutions, provide direction and so on. But how do we prompt action? How do we actually motivate the engineering side, SRE teams, et cetera, to get involved and to maybe even work toward proactively updating these things? I think the more they understand, security concepts, and the more you work with them as security champions and get the word out, the more likely they are to think about this stuff before you have to nag them. Maybe they're thinking, hey, okay, why don't we set up an automated way to patch these systems so that we don't have to hear from Dustin and his team anymore, because if we're already doing a great job, their reports are going to be clean and they're going to let us move on, right? So, I think that's a big focus of champion programs in general. It's shifting the culture toward being proactive about these things, right?
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right, so I'm going to take a break right here. Now that we've kind of done the intro, we're going to do a quick word from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back and we're going to dive deep into the conversation we're here to talk about, security champions.
The Security Champions podcast is brought to you by Security Journey. Train your development teams with engaging secure coding lessons developed to address both common and novel application threats. Security Journey offers the most flexible training plans that can use data from your AppSec testing tools to identify and train on vulnerabilities in your own code. Visit securityjourney.com to try our training today.
All right, welcome back to the Security Champion podcast. I'm here with Dustin Lehr, and we are here to talk about everything Security Champions. Now, Dustin Lehr, actually, you wrote a guide, the Security Champion Success Guide. Tell me what some of the inspiration for putting that together for was.
Yeah, I would say I really just wanted to help people. Okay, I felt like I learned a ton through the champion program at Staples and in working with other people to try to understand the challenges that people are having in general with champion programs. And I wanted to publish something that is going to help the industry as a whole, because I think, this is what I love about security, actually, is that it does feel a lot like we're all in it together to some extent. You know what I mean? Like I would say, in terms of building a community and reaching out and talking to other people, there's something about cybersecurity where it's like this us versus the bad guys type of mentality. And companies understand the best way to secure their own systems is to have their security folks out there talking to other people to learn how they're doing it. And you don't find that in every industry. You find a lot more caution when it comes to, we don't want to give anything away, and there's this competitive advantage, but it doesn't really seem like that so much with cybersecurity, and that's what I love about it. So that's part of it, is how can I help security, spread the word about, the success that I've had with security champions, and help other people build successful security champion programs as well, for the good of their culture and for the good of their companies. How do we work together? The other thing is, I like the idea of starting the conversation, starting the almost debate to some extent too, so that I can learn. If I can publish some things that people disagree with, awesome. Tell me why. Reach out to me and say, hey, this paragraph you have here, I disagree with that. Here's what I think instead. That's a learning experience for me, So it's this information exchange community thing that I'm going for.
Yeah, I never really think about it that way too. It is an amazing culture to be in with security people. You go to the conferences and everything else, and it's like everyone's pretty excited just to sit and talk and debate. Yeah. Whether it's argue or positive, it's all for the same type of goal. So it makes those type of events really fun. because it's that us versus them. It's us versus everyone else that's trying to do the negative things in this world to our organizations.
Yep.
So as you go through and you built the Security Champion Success Guide, what do you think is probably some of the biggest like highlight takeaways that our audience could take of like, hey, besides just go read it, which I highly suggest everybody go do, but are there any like key points that you really like think were driven home that everyone needs to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to talk about the structure of the guide to some extent to kick that off. Every culture is different. Okay, every single security champion program is going to be slightly different, and there's not this magic formula. Okay, so I'm not going to write a guide that's like, here's exactly what you need to do to build a successful program. So what it is it's more of a process. Okay, it's encouraging you to really think about your goals, your vision, your mission, what you're trying to accomplish, what your environment looks like, who you want to involve, what kinds of actions do you want them to take, how are you going to motivate them and encourage those actions, and then how are you going to measure yourself and measure success, right? Those are kind of the highlights of the process. And I think the point is taking your time to really understand your culture and what's going to work and what may not work is the point. That's the point of the guide, right? Now, along the way, I also wanted to offer examples, tips and tricks. Here's what I've learned. So there's a lot of stuff in there in terms of like, you should probably consider doing this instead of this, and here's why. You know, like as an example, one thing that I very much found with the Staples program is that it was an engineering-focused program, but it grew to the extent that it became a cultural thing to where we had non-engineers asking if they could join. Okay, we designed the whole thing to be engineering-focused. Technical discussions, OWASP top 10, etc. If we've got other non-technical software people, non-technical or even non-software people asking to join from marketing and sales and these other departments, we're like, well, now what? Like, how do we actually have content that's going to interest them? You know, so like one of the tips that I put in the guide is try to account for that at the beginning. Have different types of champions as an example. So like at the Fivetran program, what we've done is we actually have awareness champions as well as software champions with tailored content for both groups. You know, so anyway, so the whole thing is kind of full of tips and tricks and things like that. And yeah, I mean, to anyone listening, I would say, would love your feedback. Like if there's anything you've learned, etc., let me know. The other thing is we've got a blog on the Success Guide as well, where I actually invite industry folks, anybody, Mike, you could do it, write an article about your experience with champion programs and we'll publish it on the guide. And that's cool to like continue the conversation, you know?
So that's awesome. I'll actually probably I'll have to pass you something my way. I recently wrote an internal champions guide for a company, so I might throw it your way for a review.
Nice.
So that's awesome. You know, it's something that's funny that you brought up there with. So I've thought about security champions in the framework of somewhat developers before, but even my head was still like engineering, right? I only thought of it in the aspect of like maybe a sysadmin wants to come in, like a technical folk. I never really thought of it outside of that, like that awareness champion side of the house. It's a really inclusive culture to build that up, right? Because we have a tendency that we put a bunch of technical people in the room. They don't necessarily want to listen to non-technical people being involved in stuff. Opening those doors and embracing that culture with the awareness champions is a very powerful thing we can do in our organizations.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I would say some of our best champions are non-technical. Okay, because they get inspired. I mean, it's amazing some of the stuff that I've seen at this point. So we basically have, and this is another thing that I talk about in the guide, the gamification side, which we should probably talk about for a little bit, but we've got like a karate belt system that I know that you're very familiar with, and you work up to black belt, you know, which is kind of an easy to understand progression that most people just get, and we've had some of our black belts do amazing things. Like one of them started a book club. Okay, one of the actions that we reinforce is reading a security book. And he's like, how do we tap into that? How do we actually create a community around reading? So he creates this book club. Nobody asked him to do that. You know, he made black belt, he just did it. And it's so cool because, like, I'm just a participant in it. You know, like I started the whole champion thing, but now I'm just part of some other effort that one of the black belts started. When that stuff starts happening, it's so encouraging. It's like, hey, we created something that actually affected the culture to the point that people are doing this stuff. Now, could you imagine if you didn't inspire this naturally through a champion program, could you imagine trying to artificially set something like this up? Like if the CISO goes, hey, person, can you create a book club for us? That's not going to work, you know? Yeah. So it's the encouragement of like, hey, and the recognition to a large extent, hey, we see the actions you're doing. We're going to recognize you for that. We're going to give you status as a black belt because of all the stuff you've done. And that inspires people to get more involved and to start things and to be a leader within your org. It's amazing to see.
Yeah, the positive reinforcement, the encouragement, anything that makes learning and implementing security more palatable, right? Because it's not always palatable. Sometimes it's medicine. You just got to do the thing. But anything we can do to make it more palatable is powerful. That goes back into what you said, gamification. You brought it up. I can't let it go by. Like I'm huge into the idea of gamification. Add scoreboards, make tournaments. Before I even got into really the AppSec side of things, when I was just in security, I was a CTF guy. I love going to conferences and doing capture the flag events. It was the best part of the conference, right? I learned a lot, but the most fun part, the most engaging part was getting me on a keyboard and doing a CTF. So huge part of that gamification for learning.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the term gamification can be misused. I think it's a good idea to kind of step back and define that really quick, because essentially it comes down to what are elements in games that are motivating you, and how can we use those elements in non-game situations. Okay, so it's not, when people think gamification, I've heard a misnomer that it's, hey, you're turning it into a game. You're gamifying it. You're making it a game. That's not actually true. Gamification is more about human motivation, like figuring out what drives us as humans to play games and trying to apply those techniques elsewhere. And one of the reasons people look to games to that is people don't have to play games. Why do you play games? Why do you pick up your phone and start playing this game that you're addicted to? What is making you addicted to it? You know, like what makes you come back for more and keep you motivated and engaged and all that stuff? You're not getting any money for it. You're not winning any points with your family for it. Like what about it is keeping you coming back, right? So it's almost like the games industry has solved a lot of the human motivation elements. What can we learn from them? And how do we apply those things to real life?
So one of the companies like to call out that do this real, it's because I have an oldest daughter. She plays on her phone a lot. She's 14. She's in the top 2% of Duolingo learners because it has a phenomenal setup to reward you for learning. Like it's done really well to create kind of an addictive style learning process that makes her come back for more. So she has like almost a 2-year learning streak where she hasn't missed a day for 2 years playing on Duolingo because they do such a good reward system for learning.
Yeah, Duolingo, I've actually studied Duolingo quite a bit because they do use some of the very effective game techniques like you just mentioned, like a streak. You know, if you consistently come back and you're doing something that's beneficial over and over, you can earn benefits by having that streak, right? There's other techniques too. Like think about things like boosters. Okay, you're getting points for something. One technique that I actually like to use or recommend with security champions is how do you encourage people to continuously attend your trainings or your meetings, your brown bags? What about a booster or something like this? if people consistently attend your meetings, maybe they get double points, right? Like they show up to 3 in a row. Hey, you're now on, you've earned it. It's a streak essentially, but you've earned a booster from it. Like you get double points now for anything else that you do, as long as you keep that, right? You see that in games all the time, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Or things like collection sets. Let's say you've got a bunch of actions that you want your champions to take. Like, I want you to report a potential issue, or fix a bug here, or attend a meeting, speak up at a meeting, all those different things. What if you've got like this collection set idea where, if you do all of them, you get some other kind of bonus, which we've seen. Like think about back in the day. Do you remember the Monopoly McDonald's game?
Yes, I do.
Okay, this is great because it's a collection set idea. You've got 2 out of 3 properties, and what do we do as humans? Naturally, without any other reward, we're like, oh, well, we need to get the 3rd one. Like, the set's incomplete. I need to fix that. So again, it comes down to taking those techniques that work so well with games and figuring out how to apply them in non-game situations.
Yeah, I see it's almost like it's like a compound reward system, right? The more you dedicate in, the more consistent you are, the greater the reward. And that's what motivates my daughter, right? Like right now, I don't even know if she wants to learn the language she's learning, but she can't give up her 2-year streak. Like she can't do it. Like she's like, I put too much time in. I have too much in. I've doubled down too much. I can't give it up, right? I would love for that in our Security Champions program. Like, no, I can't miss this meeting. I have to go because I can't miss my points. I can't give that up.
Yeah. Yeah. One other trick that I've done with that is start people with a 100% attendance badge. Okay. You get to keep this badge as long as you keep your 100% attendance. Right? The second you miss something, you lose the badge. Right? So it kind of taps into kind of what you're talking about. And I think especially as the younger generations who have had video games since they were born at this point, come into the working world, they're going to want more of this stuff. Like I think there's a lot of opportunity in education and cybersecurity, and really anywhere that you want to motivate people to, tailor your approach to something that works. And games work. Why do some kids are amazing at World of Warcraft, but they can't seem to finish their math homework? What's going on there? I would say it's a misplaced motivation, because it's just as much work, let's be honest, to be, putting in so many hours in a game as it is to do your math homework. So what is different about it? What are the motivators that work in one that we could apply to the other?
I like the idea of that too, because it takes away the negative stigma of it being a game, right? Because sometimes you hear that and you're like, oh, like someone could look at a product and be like, oh, but it's just a game, right? Like how's this like in really learning? It's too childish, right? I think that's a stigma we just have because most games aren't providing real world value when you play them, right? When I play a game at home, I'm not getting a real world value, except I get to relax and play my game. So when we see that in the workplace or see that in something that's educational, I think it creates a stigma that it doesn't deserve, because there's real world value coming out of the game when you actually help motivate people that way and tap into those tendencies that make games successful.
Yeah, and there's a concept in the gamification world around explicit gamification versus implicit, meaning does this act and function like a game? That would be explicit. Versus are there game elements, but it doesn't give you a feeling that it's a game as much. It's got motivational elements that don't make you feel like you're playing a game. And like the badges and some of the recognition that we're talking about, these are things that can work without necessarily gamifying it either. Like as an example, let's say you can earn a title as security champion if you reach a certain level. If you've contributed to some extent to the security posture of your company, you can earn that as part of your HR title. Okay? And it's just security champion. That's it. There's no belt system, there's nothing. But the motivators are very similar. Do these things, earn status, earn a title, right? So that's an example of more implicit gamification. And you see this kind of stuff all the time. I don't know. I like to use little tricks in the workplace as well to help motivate folks. That doesn't use an explicit gamification approach. So just something to think about, like, especially if your culture, like you said, is very sensitive to that. And if you think they're going to react to it in a way that's, like, well, games are childish, this is a professional environment. There's still ways to use the same concepts differently so it doesn't feel like a game so much.
I mean, part of that reward system for me right off the bat is like, oh man, I get to put on LinkedIn, I'm a security champion. Right there,
Yeah.
Reward system.
Exactly. Yeah, and so there's another concept in gamification. I love this acronym. It's SAPS. I always tell everyone that I can about this. Status, access, power, and stuff. And it's basically the different types of rewards that you can get that goes beyond just material rewards, right? Like, I don't know, a lot of champion programs have cool challenge coins and things that you can earn. That's cool, but that's stuff. There's other types of rewards too, like status, like you just said, that in a lot of cases can mean more to people than just material things. So status, access is another one. Maybe they are invited to something that's exclusive, that they weren't invited to unless they earn their way in. Or power is the ability to kind of influence and make decisions and sort of be part of that side of it. So maybe your higher level security champions who've proven that they're going to contribute to the security posture of your org, they get invited to your steering group. This is actually what we do at Fivetran. The black belts get invited to our group where we organize and tweak and improve the program, and their ideas are taken into account now, right? So they've earned a certain level of power to provide feedback and actually influence the program. That stuff can be very, very effective. So.
Yeah, it's interesting when you sit back and kind of look at the different ways we can kind of find motivation. It fits really well. It makes a lot of sense to me. I love what I do because I get the chance to do what I do in this location. It's one of the best parts of my job. That's like my motivator, right? So it's the more you can give that to me, that would be a self-motivating thing. So you brought up Fivetran, right? You worked there. You guys have you recently pushed out a lot of stuff about your security champion program that you set up there. Kind of insights of setting that up in your current organization. Were any kind of new insights that you've learned, like do's and don'ts, kind of advice you'd give from that process?
Yeah, like there's some things we really did intentionally with the Fivetran program that we're now understanding whether they work or not. So let me explain this a little bit. So we've got a point system. Like I shared before, we've got essentially a bunch of activities that people can do to earn points, and then those points lead to these levels, right? Okay, great. But what happens if you're black belt? What exactly is motivating you to do anything? Like, you've reached the top, right? So what we did is we came up with, it's like almost a CPE idea, but the whole idea is the points that you earned a year ago start dropping off. So you've got this like sliding window now, right? Where the older things don't really count, and you've got to continuously be doing security related activities to keep your level. Okay, so we're like, okay, that would probably motivate people to continuously, keep their level, because it's another loss thing. Like, we don't want them to lose their status. But now we're thinking through, okay, if they do lose their status, isn't that demotivating? Like, if I was black belt and all that cool stuff I did a year ago doesn't count anymore, and I drop in level, now what? I'm demotivated potentially, and you might lose me as a champion. So what we did is we put in a double points booster, kind of back to what we were talking about before, so that when you do take action, you get double points. Okay, so you can get back up to your level quicker than you got there the first time. Okay, but here's the point. That all happens after a year. Okay, Fivetran's program is a year old. So we're just now entering the phase of people starting to drop level potentially. We've seen a couple of people actually drop level. We're kind of curious what's going to happen. Is the double points booster gonna work? So it's kind of this like grand experiment that we've been sitting on for a year, and now we get to figure out if it's going to actually work. I'm confident it will, but we'll see. So the jury's kind of still out on that one. And then I would say, like, in designing the program in general, we really thought through this stuff in detail. Like that whole process I put on the success guide, we followed that to a T. It took us months, frankly, and we felt like if we released it hastily, it has the potential to fail. And I actually see that pretty often with other clients that I work with. They got excited, they wanted to gamify it, but they released something that was sort of half-baked, and they didn't really take into account all the different moving parts and the culture and that kind of stuff. So take your time, and communicate this with leadership too, because I've seen this a lot where leadership's like, hey, where's the result? Like, I thought you had a champion program. Doesn't that mean all our vulns are going to be fixed in the next couple months? It's like, whoa, no. Culture shift and change takes time, you can get there, but setting the expectations of the time it's going to take, I think, is very important as well.
Yeah, a lot of people I've talked to out in the space that have had difficulty with their programs and kind of expressed that to me have been along the lines of, well, we got a small budget, small time to work things, so we threw something together and it's not getting adopted, and like everyone thinks it's like garbage now because we just let something go early. So I wanted, like, one of the biggest things I talk about with that too is that I almost feel that like releasing something that's a little half baked could be more detrimental than not doing anything at all sometimes, right? Because it puts a bad flavor in people's mouth about what it could be.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, there's kind of there's a brand almost associated with your champion program, and you can, unless you, if you blow it and it's not done properly, you're going to have to like almost start over and rebrand to some extent. Like, no, this isn't the champion program that you heard about before that failed. This is the security ambassador program. This is different, You might have to do something like that, and that sucks. So, like, taking some time to really think through, like, how is this going to work? Start with a subset of people, like, try this out. Bring people in. I've got this saying that I learned from a book long ago. If you want people to buy in, you need to let people weigh in. So the more you can get out there and share your design with other people, engineering leaders, etc., what do you think about this? Get some feedback, adjust accordingly. I think the more likely you are to be successful, because you've been winning advocates along the way. If you let people weigh in and you follow their suggestions, or you at least let them know that you're hearing them, that's a good way to turn them into advocates for what you're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a way to, in a lot of ways, you're actually, they have buy-in, right? They feel like they're a part of that process now. So they feel like they're invested in it because they're part of it. So it's a really cool kind of way to start recruiting people before you even really get the program up and running.
Exactly. Yeah, we had, like I mentioned, it took months for us to design this program. We had people from IT, engineering, learning and development, security, and so on involved in the process. I think we had up to maybe 7 to 8 people. We did most of the heavy lifting in terms of the documentation and stuff, but we would get together with them like every other week and review it with them, take their suggestions, and adjust accordingly. And I think that's a big reason that it ended up succeeding. I guess I can't call it a complete success yet because it's been running for a year, but we've seen people start book clubs. So I feel like, to some extent, things are going pretty well. So
I'm pretty sure on the scale of security champion programs, security champion book clubs is pretty high up there, right? On what action items that you could hope from a security program like that.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask, and it's kind of something that I think everyone has a different opinion on, and maybe it's not a one answer fits all, but like duties and responsibilities, like what is that security champion, right? Because some people, it's like, I will say the way I lean away for it, it's not the person that's out there doing all your security stuff. It's not the person like, oh, you're the person that talks to security teams, so you're going to do our security tasks. Like that's not what it is, right? So from your opinion, what is a security champion?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I've actually seen a lot of distressed champion programs where there's too much responsibility put on the champions. Like, hey, the security team is like, how are we going to fix all these vulns, and how are we going to offer advice of security to the teams? Let's just have the security champions do it all. So it becomes this, there's no additional pay, there's nothing to actually incentivize the champions to do this. And then all this responsibility falls on their shoulders. Not a good idea. Not a good situation, right? So I think, frankly, it starts really with just spending more time with the people who are interested in becoming a security champion, and letting the program to some extent be organic, and helping them grow without putting a ton of responsibility on them. So at least at first, okay? And we can kind of go into how that evolves over time, but I think, having a volunteer-based system where you're like, hey, here's a bunch of actions you can take. These are optional. You can do these things. You can do the things that appeal to you. Maybe some people don't want to speak up and speak in front of people. Maybe they're more going to study and take extra training, and they're a little more introverted. That's totally fine. And having options, for what people want to do and how people want to get involved, I think is important. And then what you see is, if you set up a system that recognizes their effort, you're going to see people start to emerge, as leaders in different spaces. This person likes to speak. This person, you invite them to maybe host your next meeting. So they get in front of everyone and they host the entire brown bag. That is something other people see. That's something that maybe they start to aspire to. Maybe you have people that love to read that start book clubs, and so on. So you can kind of let it evolve organically, especially at first. But then I think over time, as those leaders emerge, there will be opportunities to have them get more involved in your projects, do things like lead threat modeling efforts. I've seen all this stuff. I've seen it become something that's actually helping your security bottom line. But you can't start there. And this is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, is we started with threat modeling in the past, and it was too much. People didn't understand, why are we doing this? What is security? I don't even know what security is now. Threat modeling. What does threat modeling even mean? So I think you really have to build that knowledge over time by encouraging participation, encouraging them to get involved, and then you can shift toward, more well-defined responsibilities. So
I like that idea of it's a very inclusive approach, which I don't always see or hear when I'm talk to people about security champions. A lot of them are like, hey, how do I get as many people as I can? And this is a set task, and this is what it should be. Your approach is very, how am I inclusive? How do I draw people in and get the most amount of people to participate the way that's best for them, right? Which I could absolutely see how that has a huge appeal to a much larger audience. So where I think we see in the business world, we're like, hey, the business world understands we have to be inclusive, right? We have to give accessibility to everything. That's something we just know. But as far as adopting that to how we run security champion programs is a topic that I think that isn't touched on enough. And then that concept of giving you the capability to support the program the way that's best for you starts opening those doors to be very inclusive.
Exactly. I mean, that's what it's all about in my mind, is finding allies and finding folks who want to build their careers a little bit more with security in mind, and really encouraging that, finding those people who just want to get involved in some way. And then it's just fascinating because you'll see leaders emerge amongst the champion ranks, that maybe you didn't even expect, but you've given them that option and that freedom to come through as leaders versus being told what to do, So that's kind of the balance you got to strike, is like, well, you also have to prove ROI and that this champion program is working and doing something. But again, that's where you talk to leadership and you say, hey, this is going to take time. We need to build up their knowledge before they're able to really pitch in. And it works, and I think, kind of to like, to what we were talking about earlier, like there's different levels of maturity. And I think it does take a while to get to a more advanced program where you're very effectively, increasing your maturity of your security program, so.
Especially with ROI. ROI is hard with something like this, especially in the early phases. It's like, how do I prove to you this is working? Like, do we count all the vulnerabilities, and then like the less we scan, is that the ROI proof here? The more participants, is that the ROI proof here? Like, what is showing them getting the return on this investment? It's a hard question to answer sometimes.
Yeah, I've got a lot of ideas around this, and I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this and studying this, because at this point, I think I've kind of designed my career around the idea of security champions, and I like the idea of proving that they actually work in some way. So I think one of the best ways you can do that is trying to show correlation between the actions that your champions are taking and how they're affecting the bottom line. It's very similar to like training. Like, how do you prove training is working? How do you prove that, oh my gosh, the developer was about to type a vulnerability, but he remembered that training that he just took last week and he didn't? Like, how could you ever prove that, right? But what you can do is you can show either through the population as a whole or even over time that training is having an effect on the behavior of your folks, right? Same thing with security champions. Like, are the people who are more involved in your champion program, are they more likely to identify a phishing email, as an example? So you can measure that across your population, and you can show that, hey, there are benefits for having this program because we are actually affecting our ability to identify phishing, or, like you said, fixing vulnerabilities. Are developers who have a champion on their team, or even as champions themselves, less likely to introduce vulnerabilities in your environment? You can set up metrics to show that as well, right? Now, it's hard. It takes a lot of time to set up those metrics, but I think that's important if you're going to prove your ROI.
Yeah, I think that's a big takeaway for most security champion stuff. You need some patience with this. This isn't something that I'm gonna fire up today and it's gonna fix all my problems. Like, it's a slow growing machine, but once it grows, it can grow to be something big and like large and culture changing. But it's something that takes time. It takes effort.
Yeah, all change does. Right? You got to win hearts and minds and leadership, and there's a lot of work to be done. But the benefits are amazing. If you put in the time and you do it right, you can see major benefits. Because now you've got an army. You built an army. People are the biggest opportunity. Okay, let me say that, because people say people are the biggest problem. No. People are the biggest opportunity in cybersecurity. So how do we train them, utilize them to affect our bottom lines when it comes to cybersecurity?
So I actually, my background gives a very powerful statement to that. So a little tidbit on me. Special forces, very high military like background. One of the biggest things that we talk about in that organization is tools will only get you so far. You invest in the right people, you give them the right training, you empower them. That's how you win. Like, that's how you perform best. It has nothing to do with the amount of money you invest in tools. I believe that's the same in cybersecurity, right? People are our biggest tool, most powerful tool. The more we invest in them, the more we spend time on them, the better results for our products, for our organizations we're going to have. 100%. So I think we're coming slow to the end. I do have a question I have to ask you that I asked all my guests before, and it's kind of a culminating opinion between people. So one of the big themes this year for me is between development and security and bridging the divide, right? And it's kind of an idea of like, it's not a one-way street, right? It's not what can devs do for us, and it's not what security can do for devs, but what can we do for each other? In the concept of bridging the divide between security and development teams, what do you think is the best piece of advice you can give to our listeners?
I think, finding a way to have both sides understand the other side as much as possible. So the way that I would explain this is, and this is like dev person turned security person, helping the security people understand how to code, what the architecture looks like, etc. And then on the development side, having them understand the security side, and doing all that together and being solution oriented, I think is a way to bridge the gap. And really that comes down to, like, I love threat modeling exercises because of this, right? Because it's a perfect opportunity to get everyone in the room. Everyone's got something to contribute. And it's a matter of bringing your strengths and sharing those strengths so that all of you can get better. Again, security team isn't as close to the architecture as the developers. So having developers train the security team at the same time that the security team is training the developers in terms of what is important, what are the threats, what are some of the weaknesses in the architecture. It's just this great collaborative exercise that really encapsulates kind of what I'm talking about in terms of bridging the gap. So that's what I would say.
That is amazing advice. So I will second that. And I want to thank you for taking time for coming out to the Security Champions podcast, talking to me and sharing all this amazing knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This was great. Appreciate being on your show.
All right. And as to the rest of my guests listening, please make sure you log in and listen to the next podcast episode where we're going to continue to dive down more Security Champion and anything else security we feel like talking about. And remember, security is a journey, not a destination.